Hello, bird nerds. Hello, bird nerds. I'm Grant Williams, and today, I am a loony. That's right. Today, I'm a loony, and of course, anyone who's ever watched a Netflix series set in the Arctic wilderness where a bunch of terrible, awful things befall people across, around a secluded lake will know that that was the call of a loon. And to talk loons with me is, I'm going to glorify the title here. Loon expert, Dr. Kristin Bianchini, who is a wildlife biologist with Environment Canada. I think that's the right terminology. Hi, Kristin. Welcome
Hi.
to the Bird Emergency.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Now we've been trying to have a chat for quite a long time because I saw your tweets about your loon work, and you had that problem that so many of the people that I've spoken to in the last couple of years have had, doing field work during COVID. So tell us about the work that you did with loons, and then we'll spin off and talk about what loons are.
Sure. So I had a postdoctoral position with Birds Canada and Acadia University. And so I guess I had two projects that I was working on. The first project was looking at loons and how they've been affected by acid rain around Sudbury, which is this city in Canada where there was super high acid rain production in the 80s. And then there were a bunch of regulations that were put into place, and the acid rain um, was really curtailed there. And then, my job was to go back. Um, oh, sorry, there's like a lot of feedback in my earphone.
Is there? Oh, well,
Yeah,
let's.
sorry.
Okay, well, that I think that means that the headphones are going to have to come back out.
Okay.
Hold on just a minute. Just hold on. Is that taking care of it?
Let's see. Yeah, I'm not hearing an echo. Oh,
Yeah,
it's still there a bit.
I'll just go back in and change this. Okay, how about now?
Let's see. Oh no,
Yeah,
that's
no,
perfect.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's yeah. See, that's why I use the headphones. I'm really going to have to. I'm going to have to lash out and do some in-ear monitors. Um, that means I have to do the introduction again.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right. That's all right. That's all right. All right. Let me do a clap so I'll be able to find it in the edit easily, and we go back to here, go back to here, put the loon back on, and all right, let me go. Hello, bird nerds. I'm Grant Williams. This is the Bird Emergency, the show where I get to speak to people who have been doing amazing work with all kinds of birds, rare, threatened, endangered birds, and sometimes birds that are tipping that way. Today, I have a treat for you. Just imagine that you're at home, you've just clicked on Netflix or Apple TV or whatever, and the recommended for you, the scene is a deserted lake in the Arctic wilderness. Oh, I didn't even hear what I was wanting to hear. Let me. Who's crashing around at your place,
I'm
Kristen?
sorry, that's my dog. I gave her a bone.
Right. No, I'm going to do that bit again. So, the recommended Netflix show has got an opening screen around a deserted lake in the Arctic wilderness. Yes, people, you know what we're talking about. That is the common loon. The common loon, that overused sound effect in every TV series. I'm talking to an expert in loons today, Dr. Kristin Bianchini, who is a wildlife ecologist with Environment Canada. Hi, Kristin. Welcome to the Bird Emergency.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Now we're in a bit of a silly mood because we've had a couple of goes because I got something wrong, and then Kristin's dog is running around her feet enjoying a new beautiful big bone, which often means that dogs make doggy bone noises. But hopefully we don't get too much of it into the rest of the show. Kristin, thanks for joining me. You've been working on loons since, 2018, 2019?
2018, yeah.
And what was the loon project wanting to discover? Let's set it up, and then we'll talk about why loons are pretty amazing.
Sure, yeah. So I had two projects I was working on. One was analyzing 40 years of citizen science data. So people across Canada were collecting data on how many chicks loons were producing. And so it was seeing how loons have been doing over time in terms of their chick production, and then looking at different drivers of what could be affecting changes over time. And then the second project was looking at acid rain and studying an area in Canada where there was a lot of acid rain in the past, but now it's improved. And so I was just looking to see at whether the number of chicks that loons have been producing has improved along with those improvements in acid rain.
Okay. I really want to dig into that 40 years of citizen science status because citizen science is amazing, as we all know, especially when it comes to getting people involved in learning about their birds and loving their birds. Now, loons have a really interesting sort of history in terms of how they've been classified. So, loons, the genus name for loons was originally applied to a whole bunch of sea ducks. Did you know that?
I didn't know that, no.
No. So Garvia is how I would pronounce it. Is the loons, and what have we got? I think there's half a dozen odd species. Let me have a look. I should have remembered. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 recognised species at the moment of loons. And the call that we heard is the common loon, which is found sort of right around the Arctic Circle. But loons are mostly an American species, but they were initially lumped in with mergansers and related sea ducks. But then they were split out on their own. And they've got this great name that everyone thinks is derived from the English usage of the term loon, which is for lunatic and people who are crazy, and thought to perhaps derive from the vocalisations or how clumsy they are on land, because they're a bit they're back-ended. The legs are very far back, and they're a heavy bird for their size. But from my research, neither of those derivations are correct. Do you know what I'm really putting on the spot here, but do you know what the most likely derivation of the word loon is?
I know I've learned about this at some time, but it's escaping me, so you're going to have to tell me.
The Norse, or the Norwegian word for loon, is roughly the same as how we pronounce loon. Let me just get the the right one. Gee, it's miles down my research here. Where are we? Loon, Lurn, Loon, I think. It's either Learn or Loom. So there we are. Someone who's an entomologist or whatnot will probably pick me up and tell me I'm wrong. But that seems to be where it's come from as the Vikings came into other parts of Europe. That word has been attached to that bird. So there we are. All right. How did you go, Kristin, with studying the loon in the time of COVID? Oh, your dog loves his bone too.
Yeah, she's really upset right now. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Please don't tell me you took the bone away from the dog.
She hates being alone. She just wants my attention. Sorry.
Oh well, there we go. What's her name so that everyone can know who's joining in?
Well, our other co-star here is Coda. She's a 4-year-old German Shepherd cattle dog mix.
Oh, good on you, Coda. Well,
Yeah.
don't feel lonely. Kristin's still there. So let's get back to the important matter of doing field work in a time of a global pandemic. Set us up. You said there was a lot of data there for you to analyse, but what field work were you planning to do, and what did you get completed?
Well, luckily, most of my field work took place in 2019, the year before the pandemic. And so the field work that I was doing was going up to 94 lakes around Sudbury, Ontario, in Canada. And so I was looking for loons, and then I was taking water samples to measure different kind of water chemistry parameters to see whether lakes were acidic and different kind of indications of whether they'd improved chemically over time. So it was a lot of backcountry camping, which was really fun, and canoeing from lake to lake, driving on logging roads, which was pretty exciting, and yeah, dealing with a lot of black flies and mosquitoes.
Excuse me. So, was most of it working on your own?
I had a field assistant. So it was me and my field assistant who were up there for 2 months in May. So that's the height of black fly season in Ontario. So it was pretty intense. And then we went back in September. So we were there in May to find out which lakes had loons and which loons had chicks. And then we went back later to see if or how many chicks were over 6 weeks old, because once loon chicks reach about 6 weeks of age, they're more likely to survive and become adults. So it's a good measure of reproductive success in loons.
How many species of loon are there in Canada? And were you only looking, like, had you restricted your research just to the common loon?
Yes, so there are 5 species of loons in Canada. We were just looking at common loons because those are the ones that are found in Ontario. So that's where I was doing all of my research. The other loons there are other loons in Ontario, but they're much farther north, kind of more in the Arctic region.
Okay. And is the common loon a sort of common run-of-the-mill bird when, if people are out at a lake, I mean, I'll just say what happens if you're here in southern Australia, you're likely to see some black swans, Pacific black ducks, grey teal, moorhen, coot, swamp hens, maybe some pelicans, but that's what you're likely to see swimming around on your local lake. What's the case if you head out to, obviously it's colder, but an hour's drive out of the big city? What are we talking? I know that Windsor's in Ontario. That's about the only. What are people likely to see a common loon? Are they are they a normal bird?
Yeah, if you get into the boreal, so that's kind of northern areas where there are lots of like pine and spruce trees and lakes. There are lots of loons. Their name's pretty appropriate. They're pretty common, but I would say that even though they're pretty common, they're a really cherished species here. Like everyone gets pretty excited when they see a loon, even though they're like pretty common.
And do you think that has a bit to do with the fact that the call is just used so often to set up spookiness or remoteness in all sorts of TV shows, movies, audio books, all sorts of things. The loon sets up loneliness, remoteness, foreboding. There's a whole lot of ways that call is used. Is that why Canada loves the loon?
I think, yeah, it has something to do with that. I think it's because for us, like, it's associated with going camping and being outside. They're real symbol of the wilderness here. So I think everyone has really fond memories if they're out kind of enjoying summer on a lake, then that's where the loons are. So I think it's just got really, really nice associations for us of summer and being outside.
Ripper. The it, is the conservation status of the loon stable? Like, are the populations decreasing, and is that why your work was needed, or is there just no concerns whatsoever for the loon?
Well, for the common loon, they're doing pretty well in Canada. It really depends regionally on where you're talking. And because they're also found in the northern states in the US, and they've been extirpated from some states. They're starting to do a bit better depending on where you're talking about. But in Canada, loons are doing pretty well. And the reason that I was looking at them was more so that preliminary work had shown that they were producing fewer chicks over time. And so we were looking at their reproductive success to see what if something could be going on there.
What did you learn? My preliminary research tells me that loons have an average clutch size of 2, but that it may be 1. So, what did your results tell you about clutch size, and did you find out anything about brood success?
Yeah, so unfortunately, we found that in Ontario, and especially in regions like Sudbury, where there was a lot of acid rain in the past, loons are producing fewer and fewer chicks over time. So we're not seeing changes in adult numbers because loons are really long lived. They'll live to be about 30 years old. So you're not going to see changes very quickly in the number of adults, but we're seeing that there are fewer chicks. So that could produce fewer adults in the long run.
And the acidification of the lakes, is that increasing, or is it stable? Like, what were you able to determine in that set of data that you gathered?
Yeah, so acid rain is kind of an interesting story because it was a real success story in terms of like government actions coming into place, noticing that acid rain was a problem, and then putting regulations in place. So acid rain isn't really a problem in terms of its production, but the problem is that so even though lake chemistry is improving, it just takes the biology a long time to recover. So how acid rain works is that it gets so basically fish are really sensitive to acid, and so they will be removed from any kind of lakes that are really acidic, and so then loons don't have anything to eat. And it's just that even though the lake chemistry can improve, it doesn't mean that all of the fish populations can recover. So even 40 years after the initial study that was done that showed that lakes were really acidic and loons were doing really poorly, we're seeing that even though lakes are becoming less acidic, it's just that the biology hasn't been able to catch up yet.
So, what do you think is the medium term future for the populations of loons that you've been looking at? Is climate change perhaps a factor that will cause further acidification? Like, because generally, as temperatures increase in a water body, I think the ability to absorb more of those acidifying compounds occurs. I think that's my rudimentary understanding of chemistry. So, do you think there's a link that someone else is obviously going to have to research, but that climate change might undo a lot of the good work that's been done? Oh, poor dear.
Yeah, so Coda's got a lot of opinions.
Definitely, she's telling me to go back and work on my chemistry, I think.
Yeah. So yeah, actually, climate change is a really interesting story. Like, so what some of my work showed is that there's probably a complex interplay between acid rain, and mercury, and climate change. So, so yeah, acid rain affects mercury because on more acidic lakes, there's more mercury available to enter into the food chain and to make its way up into loons. And then what climate change does is that it's increasing mercury levels. So there was a really good study in Ontario that showed that warmer temperatures and other factors associated with climate change are increasing mercury levels in fish. And then it's also causing higher water level fluctuations, which increase mercury and make lakes more acidic. So it's a really complex kind of interplay with acid rain, mercury, and climate change that could be affecting loon reproductive success.
So, is the is mercury the main chemical issue when it comes to acid rain, or are there other compounds that build up and affect the loons as well?
Yeah, so lead is also a big problem for loons because they're exposed to it from like fishing, tackle, and like lead shot. Or I guess lead shot isn't so much of a problem for loons, but yeah, lead poisoning is also a big problem for loons. Not so much related to climate change though.
And what's the food for loons? I saw that they're a visual hunter for getting their food, but I'm assuming they eat fish and frogs and other amphibians. But how broad is their diet? Were you analysing what they're eating in terms of the chemicals that they're ingesting?
Yeah, unfortunately, we weren't able to look at mercury in fish and in loons directly, but we more so looked at the chemistry of the lake because there's a lot of work that was done previously that showed that on lakes that are more acidic, there are fewer fish. And there's also work linking yellow perch mercury. So yellow perch is the preferred food of loons. They'll eat a lot of stuff, but yellow perch are kind of the food that they love the most. And so there was research that linked yellow perch mercury to mercury levels in loon blood.
That's pretty interesting that they have a a main species that they prefer to eat. So they're pretty fussy. So that sort of begs the question about how yellow perch numbers are holding up in the face of climate change. Do you think there is any cause for concern there?
Yeah. So the loons will eat lots of other stuff. They can eat like other fish species and invertebrates and yeah, like you mentioned, crabs and stuff. But I think there's some work showing that cold water species won't do as well because of climate change, and that could affect the types of fish that are accessible to loons. So the warm water adapted species might not be as easy for loons to catch or as nutritious for them.
Okay. I'm really interested, Kristen, in that 40-year data set you were talking about with citizen science data. Can you tell us a little bit about what that project is and what people actually are doing, and who who runs it, and is it ongoing?
Yeah, so the data set that I was working with, it's called the Canadian Lakes Loon Survey. So it started in Ontario in 1981 by Birds Canada, and it's expanded throughout all of Canada since the 1990s. So it's the most popular citizen science program run by Birds Canada, and it's pretty cool. So it's just a lot of people in Ontario will visit lakes regularly, or they live on lakes, and so they'll go out 3 times during the summer. To the first time, they'll look for loons and to see if they have chicks, and then they'll kind of monitor on the other 2 visits how old those chicks are and whether those chicks have survived to getting at least 6 weeks of age. And so it's a really cool data set that's been super valuable. I analyzed data just in Ontario because the data went back to the 1980s. I analyzed data from over 1,500 lakes. And so, yeah, there are over, I think it's 4,000 or 5,000 citizen scientists working on these Canadian Lakes Loon Survey projects every year. And yeah, it's an ongoing and super popular project.
That's pretty great. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I love the citizen science projects, and the bird counts around the world are really growing. That I mean, India run one, as well as Canada, obviously run their one. New Zealand have got a good one. Australia have got one. Uh, I think Britain run a couple each year. I think they run a couple of seasonal ones. How how important, and I want to sort of drag you in a bit about your the role you've got now with Environment Canada. Is it Environment Canada, or is it just Department of the Environment?
They changed their name recently. It's Environment and Climate Change Canada.
There we go. Well,
Yeah.
good on them. That's some more work for the designers. How how important is it nowadays, with so many restrictions and obviously tight budgets and everything, for ongoing citizen science projects um, for people like yourself doing any kind of conservation work in in a government department?
Oh, it's hugely important. So it just makes it so that you have these massive data sets that scientists alone would never be able to collect. So by having like 1,500 lakes worth of data, that would be impossible for a research program to have enough funding to visit all of those lakes. So it's really just like people being enthusiastic and collecting data about birds that they like to watch anyway, and having all of this huge amount of data. It really creates for really powerful analyses. And
And
so, yeah. Oh, sorry.
uh, I was wondering, Kristen, whether you tap into other data sets as well, like eBird and Merlin and any others that are out there, to perhaps support uh, any hypothesis that you might be making, or any of the conclusions that you make from your own data set. How widely do you cast the net nowadays?
It really depends on the question I'm asking. I have used, for the loon work, I actually used eBird data on bald eagles and double crested cormorants because there's some concern about bald eagles depredating loons and eating their chicks. And so that can affect reproductive success. We found that that wasn't a problem in Ontario, but there are studies showing that it is a problem in other places. And we were looking at double crested cormorants because there's a lot of concern about whether they deplete food or fish populations in the lakes that loons visit. So I was looking at eBird to kind of collect data on other species to see how they could be affecting loons. Um, yeah.
So what conclusions did you reach with your uh, with your loan work? Like, we we've ascertained that you found that the clutch size, or that was it clutch size is decreasing, or um, successful rearing uh, was was decreasing. Let's get as accurate as we can.
Sure. Yeah. So loons will usually only raise like maximum 2 chicks. So it's between 1 and 2 chicks. So we were just looking at reproductive success, which we measured as the number of 6 week old pair or chicks per pair per year. So it's the number of 6 week old chicks that each pair produces per year. That was what we were measuring.
Okay, so it's a little bit more general than the clutch size. It's
Mm-hmm.
really just looking at the overall mortality or the overall success out of each nest. So did did you determine whether actually fill me in on the habit of the loon? Um, if there is it a big territory that loons exclude other nesting loons from, or do they tolerate neighbours? Like how does a breeding pair of loons go about their nesting business?
They're very territorial. So as soon as the breeding season kicks in, the loons are there. They're meeting with their mate, and then they're defending their territory. And they'll defend their territory and get into these pretty intense battles with other loons that try to take their place. Um, so yeah, there it depends on the size of the lake in terms of how many loons it can support, and it also depends on the shape of the lake. So if there are a lot of bays and different areas where loons can't make can't see each other, then there can be more loon pairs. But smaller lakes would probably only have one loon pair, and that is just kind of a factor of food availability.
And what did you determine with the bald eagles? Are they a major predator of loon chicks or loon parents at all, or is that just sort of incidental predation?
Actually, we found, so in my work in Ontario, we found that on lakes where there were more eagles and more double crested cormorants, there were more chicks being produced. So we think it's just a matter of all of these birds all eat fish. And so they're all attracted to lakes where there are a lot of fish. And so that's why we're seeing higher numbers of all three species on the same lakes.
That's sort of counterintuitive in one sense, but it makes perfect sense at the same time. So I know this wasn't really within the scope of your research, but because you're now at Environment Canada and climate change, is are lakes across Canada remaining healthy, like in terms of a good population of fish for predators, as well as the fish themselves, of course. Do you think the situation in Canada is is stable, or is it getting better, or are less lakes being those really healthy multi predator kind of suitable habitats?
Yeah, so unfortunately, our work was showing that lake health is probably declining. So the loons are a really good indicator of lake health because they're top predators, and the loon chicks are really confined to the lake where they're born. Um, when they're really small, they can't get food from any other lake, and so the amount of food that's in that one lake will partially determine reproductive success. So if there isn't enough food, there's not enough fish in the lake, the loon chicks aren't going to survive. And so we found that there are fewer and fewer loon chicks being produced over time, which would suggest that something in the lake isn't healthy and that these loons, the lakes aren't able to support the loons.
So, will a nesting pair remain at the same lake all year, or do mature loons migrate, or are they just cruising around wherever they can find some good food, or are they a resident species?
No, and so the loons that are in Canada in the summer, they migrate to the ocean, so they'll go farther south in the summer, or sorry, in the winter. So yeah, they're only here in the summer.
So, are there problems for the loon populations generally in how those southern countries, which I'm guessing is going to be in the Canadian population, it's going to be the US and Mexico. Now, do they go further afield? Do they go out to the maybe to the Caribbean, or is there a Atlantic and a Pacific population? How does that work?
Yeah, so I'm not super familiar with their migration, but I think the loons that are in Ontario will fly kind of to the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico, and then the ones that are in kind of the western part of Canada, so the western provinces will go more to the Pacific and down near like California, and then as far south as kind of that Pacific edge of Mexico.
So the question I really want to get to there, while the loons are breeding in Canada, there's a bunch of countries that are just caretakers for the birds at different times of the year. So, do you know if if there's a sort of unusually high mortality, let's put it that way, for birds that are spending the winter in the US or even in on the shores of Mexico? Is there any indication that each year less birds are returning? That's probably the best way to put it, isn't it? Uh, yeah, and you know where I'm going, don't you? I'm just trying to find out whether Canada seems to have really turned the corner in the way it manages its natural environment, but some countries haven't got there yet. But they are major influences on the population health of any bird, any animal that uses that space. And of course, birds don't vote. So, what what do you think? Is America a long? Yeah, let me be controversial. Is America a long way behind Canada in the way they're looking after the environment for the loons, Kristen?
You're putting me on the spot here. Yeah, I guess the the loons. The thing is that they're hard to study on the ocean. They're hard to find. I know that when they're in places like the Gulf of Mexico, they can be affected by things like oil spills. So loons were really heavily impacted by the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, for example. There are a lot of loons that died because of that. Um, and yeah, in terms of other kind of things that loons are exposed to, it's really a black box for loons. It's hard to study them on the ocean, and so not a lot is known about them when they're spending their winter down south.
Do they get hunted?
I think, well, they're protected under the Migratory Bird Act, so they shouldn't be hunted. But I'm not sure what if they are, and it's not recorded.
I'm really interested to know, Kristen. What do you think is the best thing about the loon?
Oh, that's a tough question. They're beautiful birds. They're super charismatic, and their call is yeah, like you said, it's very eerie and haunting and unique. Yeah, they're. I think they're just like a really cool bird.
And from your work, um, what did what did you realise still needs to be done? Like, what's the next kind of um, priority research, from your opinion, that needs to be carried out on loons?
Well, so we looked at loons in Ontario and what could be driving decreases in their reproductive success. But the factors that we found that were involved, so that was pH and mercury and possibly climate change is involved there. They might not be the same for every other region. So there are different threats to loons in different areas. So a really good future project. And I think a few of my co authors are kind of setting up this project for someone else to work on. Would be to look at threats in different regions and to see what's affecting loons in the different kinds of areas that they visit.
And how hard is it to get a project like that up? I mean, you're working in the government sector now, having been in the university sector, yeah. So, how difficult is it to get a study up that will last for long enough to get you enough data to be able to inform decisions in government? Let's talk about process rather than any particular project.
Well, getting the projects going is the good thing about Loons is that they're such good indicators and they have like a big following. People really love Loons, and so there are already a lot of long-term projects that have been going on for a while. So there's work in Wisconsin and Minnesota looking at Loons. There's a lot of work in Maine and in some of the other northern U.S. states. And then there's the Canadian Lakes Loon Survey, which is all across Canada. And the good thing about the loon world is that it's pretty small. So everybody knows each other, and it's a really great group that's good at collaborating. So I think kind of piecing together all these long-term data sets is pretty doable for loons, thankfully.
Is how how do you think that you can solve the problem of understanding what the birds are doing during the winter when they're uh, in the ocean? I mean, um, I, I'm I mean, just the question that comes up for me is is the loon population reducing just simply because of where they migrate to, because the risks there are so much higher, and that if similar losses were felt for any reason in their breeding grounds, that it could very quickly become a a really difficult problem for maintaining the population. Um, how so? How do you get citizen scientists to be working on the ocean? Uh, I mean, can fishermen and I'm just trying to think who might see them. I mean, are people working in the oil industry and the fishing industry likely to see loons, or do you know if when they're in their coastal portion of the year, whether they're just keeping as far away from people as they can?
That's a really good question. I'm not super familiar with loons and how easy they are to find on their wintering grounds. I think they do come close to shore sometimes, and so I was actually just reading a book about loons that where someone talked about finding them in the winter, and they were successful at finding them. But it really just depends. Probably, I think it would take someone who's more familiar with kind of where they are and how they behave in the winter to answer that properly.
So that kind of says that citizen science is not the answer um, to do that kind of work. So then, it just means it's hard, isn't it, to get a
Yeah.
project like that up.
Mhm.
Um, let I I like to try and help people understand what researchers like yourself do, Kristen. So when you're setting out like you were for what was it, 9 weeks in the field with an assistant, um, how much planning goes into that, and how how does that impact sort of your normal life, being away for because it's not holidays, so you're still going to get vacation time and everything later in at some other point in the year, I assume. So, how does being away for over 2 months at a time uh, impact your? I mean, what do you do with the dog?
Well, I think that a lot of people get into biology because they like doing that kind of stuff. So for me, it's like you're getting paid to do something you love. So you're out, I don't know, camping for 2 months, looking for loons and going around in a canoe and driving on some crazy, like, dangerous roads. And yeah, I thought it's a lot of fun. But it does take a lot of planning to answer the first part of your question. It took about 6 months to kind of plan out what lakes we were going to visit and how to get to these remote lakes, and all the supplies that we would need. So getting all the food for 2 months, and yeah, getting permits. And so yeah, it takes a lot of planning. So there's a lot of legwork to get there. But once you're in the field, yeah, it was kind of a highlight of the loon work that I did, to be honest.
Now, tell me, I usually ask a couple of standard questions about what people take into the field and whatnot, but I'm going to assume that so many of the places that you were visiting in that couple of month period, you didn't have access every day to the internet. So, what's the process of keeping the records? How do you record the data, and then how do you process it? And as a follow-on to that, what's the essential equipment that you take out on that kind of field trip to hang out with your loon buddies?
Well, we record the data just on pen and paper, and you have to be pretty organized to make sure that everything stays dry. And luckily we had a car, so we could put everything in the car. And I guess in terms of essential equipment, yeah, well, we have to have like binoculars for looking for loons. The canoe and the vehicle were pretty essential. Otherwise, like our tent, and like sleeping, camping supplies. Yeah, I guess it's anything that you would take on a camping trip is pretty much what we needed. And in terms of the research, it was more like vials for holding water and binoculars were kind of our two main things.
So you're not taking any sort of gadgets to do any data uploads or anything along the way, or maintaining a database along the way. It's all pen and paper, and then you do all of the input when you come back to the lab, the department.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were places in our fieldwork where we didn't even have radio. So like tuning into the radio on the car. So like there's no cell phone reception. There's nothing out there. We did have a GPS, so we could, if we got lost, we could find our way. But yeah, in terms of technology, is very, very basic. And then, yeah, you take all of those papers and enter them into an Excel sheet when you get home.
So how good is it to be away, to be totally unplugged like that?
Oh, it's great. Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, and we listened to a lot of talk radio when we did have radio, so that was kind of our tune into the world when we wanted to. But otherwise, it's really good to be unplugged.
Wouldn't that be hugely depressing, listening to talk radio? I couldn't imagine anything worse.
Oh, Canada has a really good, well, at least I think it's good. We have a really good CBC Radio 1, which is our kind of talk radio station. I really like it.
So is that one your Canadian broadcasting like public talk station? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So that I guess it's not so bad. I'm always thinking North America. I'm lumping you guys in with the other one. I mean, we've got amazing ABC and the BBC similar as well, New Zealand as well with yeah, good talk shows. Where sometimes they even talk about the environment and birds and things too. Mm-hmm. Actually, let's talk about that a bit. The reason I contacted you was because, hey, loons. Wow, loons. So when you were doing your loon work and writing it up, you mentioned to me before we went live that it was the most attention you'd ever got for any of your field work. So tell me about Loon Celebrity. Who wanted to talk to you, and what kind of things did people want to know about your field work? I'm really interested to know what normal media want to talk about with birds.
Well, I was actually interviewed by the CBC, which was kind of a big deal for me since I'd listened to them all summer. Um, so that was good. And then a few like kind of nature magazines were interested in loons. I think a lot of people just want to know a lot about their behavior, a lot about their calls. And then I think people are really concerned about loons because just anecdotally, you'd run into a lot of people who would tell you that like people really take possession of the loons on their lake. So those are their loons. They see them every summer. And a lot of people that we talked to would tell us that they weren't seeing as many chicks, or maybe those loons weren't coming back. And so there's just a lot of people who are concerned about loons. And yeah, so there's a lot of interest in the work in terms of like what we're finding and what could be going on with loons.
What what kind of things did they ask you that uh, maybe surprised you? Like, I'm I'm really interested in how um, the the mainstream media. I mean, those kind of stations often don't have a really wide breadth of knowledge about the environment, the local environment. So, what kinds of questions did you get asked, and do you think there's a good understanding about loons in general, and maybe water birds in general, the birds that use the lakes? Tell, yeah, just give us a bit of an idea of what it's like to talk to well, people like me who have got less interest in birds than me.
I'd say, like, in terms of loons, I think most people know about them and are interested in them. So, in general, a lot of the questions were pretty good. I think the worst question I had was when I was talking about how lakes with fewer fish don't have as high of reproductive success for loons. I did get one question where someone was like, well, what's the solution? Do we just throw fish in a lake for loons? Is that how we deal with it? And I don't know. It's just like, no, you can't just put fish in a lake.
that, well, that's kind of what I was expecting that you
Yeah.
might get, because uh, so often I'll hear discussions about any kind of conservation or environmental issue, and the presenters are often looking for
Mhm.
the easy solution, and it's never easy. There's always a number of factors, which I'm amazed at people who have spent 40 years or 30 years or 20 years in interviewing people, that they kind of don't seem to get it.
Mhm.
Anyway, um, your role now, Kristin. What are you working on now? And let's have a look. What's your sort of 5 year plan as a scientist?
Oh, good question. I'm very new at my new job, I should say. I just started on Christmas Eve, actually, so I've only been at it a few months. But I'm mostly working on kind of what I was doing with loons, but on different surveys. So, looking at really large data sets for different bird species and looking at their populations and what could be driving any kind of population change.
And what have you got target species in mind?
Well, right now I'm working on a sea duck paper. So, scoter species. They're a sea duck that breeds in Canada. And I'm also working on a project with American woodcocks, which are a bird kind of in forested areas in Canada.
Now, does the American woodcock, the one you're looking at, does that do the jig?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Okay, woodcocks are cool. Uh, uh, that means I'm going to have to find a clip, aren't I, and put it in and show everyone. Um, uh, now, Scotter or Scoter?
Scoter. Well, that's how we
Scoter.
pronounce them. Yeah.
Okay, Scoter. Now, I know the surf Scoter. How many Scoters can you study in Canada?
There are three scoters in Canada. So there's black, white wing, and surf scoter.
And which one's the most common? I'm guessing it's the surf Scoter.
Uh, I'm not sure about numbers. I was more looking at their distribution. So the white wing and surf scoters are widely distributed, and the black scoters are kind of more separated, like on the Pacific and Atlantic coast. But I'm not really sure about their numbers, and that's kind of why we're studying scoters, is that they're kind of not really well known.
Okay, well, I've only ever seen pictures of scoters, obviously. So, what's cool about scoters?
Um, Well, yeah, I honestly don't know that much about them because I've kind of just started the work with them. But they're kind of cool in that like, the work that I'm doing with them is pretty cool because they put satellite tags on scoters and then track them for several years. So you get to kind of see where these birds are going, which people hadn't really known before. So that was pretty interesting.
How, how long's that project going for, and what did you discover up to up till now? Like where where are the tagged birds going?
Well, they're going pretty much like Arctic Canada and Alaska, but it's just knowing where they are relative to kind of the big surveys that take place in North America, and how that affects their monitoring. Um, and yeah, and just kind of the known species ranges, and then kind of extending those ranges into new areas.
Now, I was talking about penguins, putting trackers on penguins with Ursula Ellenberg recently, and we talked about the numbers of birds that need to be harnessed to to make a meaningful study. How many scoters got got a backpack? And actually, was it the harness type of tracker that you were using, or were you using the smaller ones that can be glued on to like a tail feather or something?
These ones were surgically implanted, so they had a vet that would
Okay, yeah,
implant
yeah.
them into the bird. Yeah.
Okay, so they're the ones where you have to find the bird again is to read the data.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Okay. See, there's so many ways to do the research nowadays. So, just to finish off on SCOTUS, do you know how many birds were implanted? Like, what's the size of that project?
I think it was close to 200. So we took all of the SCOTR data from all of North America and analyzed it. So, and it had been going on for basically since the satellite transmitters were available. So it was a pretty big data set.
Cool, and that's uh, it's. Imagine if we had have had this kind of data and the cooperation, cross-border research available in this manner in the last sort of 50 years, we probably wouldn't have mucked it up so badly, would we?
Yeah. And really, like, it is kind of a large scale problem because these migratory birds go everywhere. So it's not just like one country where they're affected, it's all over.
That's one of the things that I I'm not sure that people really come to terms with when it comes to planning. I think it's a much like the same problem that I dumped on the mainstream media broadcasters. I really don't think that politicians really understand how that unless they're an endemic resident population, they're not your birds. They're everyone's birds, that and that we need to look after them everywhere they go. And the flyways cooperations tend to get it, but I'm still not sure that the broader migrations in general. I mean, just even thinking about the issue of bird strike, which I've done, a number of interviews on. The idea that planning and building codes have something to do with conservation is foreign to a lot of decision makers. So tell me, with that long-winded sort of preamble, tell me, Kristen, do you think Canada is becoming more mature in its processes for decision making with conservation and environmental issues? And is it continuing to head in the right way? Or is there still a big divide between one sort of side of the aisle in Parliament and the other? Like, what's the situation?
Well, from what I'm seeing, I think there's a lot of moves in the positive direction in terms of having these kind of joint venture projects where it's these huge collaborations between like flyway kind of studies and international studies. I think there's a lot of work really recognizing that birds don't really recognize borders. And so looking at birds kind of in South America and in Canada and in the US and knowing that they're affected at each stage of their migration and everywhere that they visit, I think there's a real kind of broadening of the research that's being done. So that's all really good to see.
That is really, really encouraging. Let's sort of wrap it up on a really, really happy note. We kind of, I asked you about a 5-year plan. What do you see your long-term future in science, or do you have have you got something you really want to do that you haven't been able to branch out into yet? SciComm, driving more citizen science. Where do you see yourself heading?
Honestly, I really like what I'm doing right now. I've already kind of branched out. I started studying fish, so I got into birds because I love doing it, and I really like analyzing bird data and field work when I'm able to do it when there's no pandemic on. So yeah, I'm kind of doing what I like to do already. So if I can keep doing that for the next 5 years, that'd be great.
So can we call you a bird nerd yet? Are you a certified bird nerd?
I don't know if you could say that. I'm a terrible birder. I like birds and I appreciate them, but I'm terrible with bird ID. So I don't know if I fit into that category yet.
Well, I think you can be a bird nerd while your ID skills are developing. One of the sort of the bridges that you have to cross, I think, to become a certified bird nerd is, are you keeping a list?
I have in the past, not so much now because I am just kind of at home seeing house sparrows all the time. But I do have a list.
Well, I think that means you're a bird nerd.
All
Anyone
right.
who's kept a list is a bird nerd. I think if you do more bird projects, you're well and truly ensconced in the bird world. As long as you don't go back and like study eels or something like that, and then get distracted.
Yeah.
Tell me about the SCOTA project. Can people still contribute to that data set, and the Loon data set is ongoing? So where can people who are in Canada and North America, and I'm guessing if they're seeing loons further south, they can enter data. Where can people do that?
Well, for the loons, the Canadian Lakes Loon Survey, it's run by Birds Canada, and it's a really great citizen science program. So if anyone wants to look it up, it's on the Birds Canada website or just like Google Canadian Lakes Loon Survey. And yeah, they're always looking for more volunteers. So you can help collect a lot of really good loon data.
And can people still contribute to the SCOTA project?
The Scoter project wasn't a citizen science project, so that one is more just like researchers, scientists doing their kind of thing.
Okay, so but if you're not a scientist, if you're a citizen scientist, you can still use eBird. So
Oh yeah, that's true.
go ahead and do that. Now, Birds Canada, I think, is birds.ca from memory. Is that's right, isn't it?
I think it's birdscanada.ca. But I could, yeah.
Birdscanada.ca. Well, I'll get the link right in the description since we've been talking about it. And your department in government, Kristin, what are they doing in terms of outreach, and are they running any citizen science projects on anything that people can be involved in?
That's a good question. I think like the department that I'm in mostly takes other people's data and analyzes it. But we do a lot of work with the Breeding Bird Survey, which is a bird survey that's across North America. So they run bird surveys along roads, like roadside surveys, and they're done once a year. And it's the longest running citizen science project in Canada. So that's also a really good way for people to get involved.
And putting you on the spot, is that through the department that they would find that, or would that be through Birds Canada again, or maybe through Audubon? Or
That one, I think it's through Canadian Wildlife Service, but I could be wrong. But if
okay,
you just Google breeding bird survey, you definitely find it.
I love the idea of a roadside survey. I reckon that's something that we should get up and running in Australia, because in a lot of cases the only connectivity between different populations and different remnant habitats is roads. So yeah, I think understanding the movements and who's using those road reserves, I think is pretty important. Well, Kristin, I reckon we've looned out, totally looned out. It's been a different kind of discussion for the show, because we weren't really talking about an endangered bird, but an indicator bird. I think that's and I probably need to do that more and more often, because there are data sets out there that can be used, and we can interpret all kinds of things from that data. You know, tell me about the sparrows. Are sparrows having issues in Canada? I know it's anecdotal. When you look around, are you seeing sparrows decreasing in number, or increasing, or stable?
It depends on the species. So house sparrows are invasive, and they're doing great. They're everywhere. But the other sparrow species, I'm not super familiar with, but I think a lot of bird species aren't doing very well, other than the invasives like the house sparrow.
Yeah, I've told the story a lot of times. I'll just share it with you. One of the reasons that I started doing the show was I was noticing that house sparrows, and they're invasive species here, were actually reducing in number. I was noticing it in my neighbourhood, but the thing that concerned me, apart from the fact that, gee, why are sparrows decreasing? But nothing was replacing them, so that just means there's less birds around. So yeah, hopefully we can arrest that. Hey,
Oh, I hope so.
yeah. Good. Okay, Kristin, thanks so much for joining me. Best wishes in your new job. That hopefully we'll hear and see some amazing work that you put out over the years to come. And hey, if you want to talk to me about any other bird stuff that you end up doing, hit me up, because I love talking about birds.
Yes, sounds great.
Well, that's been the Bird Emergency. I'm Grant Williams. That's Kristin Bianchini. I got it right this time. We'll talk to you the next time. Thank you, everyone. Okay, now I'm just going to. I'll edit. I'll probably end up editing myself almost out of this.